All right. This is BX Blues for the divinenature.net. BX Blues for the divinenature.net. So check it out. I'm going to be covering this whole issue, this Bible difficulty found in Deuteronomy 22:28 through 29. It has to do with what atheists always accuse and will use forever until time ends, marrying the rapist. Okay, this is the one that they will always bring up. Okay, and this is a tough one. I have to say this is one of the challenging issues in Scripture when it comes to Bible difficulties. There are a number of them, but we can get through them. Okay, and there is some understanding and, of course, honesty and scholarship that is necessitated in order to understand these things. Okay, so if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 22, you'll see that it's bringing up a number of issues. It's not just talking about this one issue. And we have to take the whole context of the issue in order to get a closer understanding of what was going on at the time. Now, understand and have some scholarly respect for the issue of what we're dealing with here. We're talking about language. We're talking about ancient Hebrew. We're talking about the culture, historicity, what was going on at that time. We're talking thousands of years ago, okay, in ancient Israel, right? So that's what we're talking about. And so many times people will come in here and they will read the Old Testament like they read the back of their Cheerio box every morning, and they think they will get and capture a honest and scholarly understanding of what Deuteronomy 22 is talking about. But if we really decipher, if we really go in and comb these texts carefully, study, see what other people have said about this, commentaries, and understand the language variations and the historicity that takes place in understanding ancient Israel, we realize, okay, Deuteronomy 22 is encompassing a number of issues here. First, it will talk about the women's purity laws starting from verse 5. Okay, it talks about not wearing men's clothes. Number 2, it talks about the purity in marriage with regard to virginity of a woman. Number 3, it's going to go into adultery. Okay, you're going to see this in verse 22. A man sleeping with a married woman, both are killed. Okay. And then number 4, we're talking about adultery. Okay. At verse 23, purity and engagement, which is called betrothal, right? Both men and women are going to be killed. If it's not rape, a woman is designated to call for, to yell, as per verse 25, right? This is the distinction between whether we can judge whether it's a rape or whether it is not, whether it's consensual, right? And you'll see that in verse 25 of chapter 22 of Deuteronomy, okay? Only the rapist is killed, okay? In this situation, in verse 23, you'll notice that. Now, I'm blasting through all of these verses, but this is very highly technical and highly scholarship that you have to really look into this and combing this very clear. But I'm trying to see if I can condense this into a short video to kind of come into the conclusion of what we're looking at and what we're dealing with here. Okay. Number 5, both are found. This word that we see in Scripture, both are found. Concentrate on that, right? After he seizes her or takes advantage of her, we see that in verse 25. It says, but, okay, there's a contrast there, and to what's going on in verse 24, right? Where the woman does not yell, right? In verse 26 through 27, the woman yells and is REPED, raped, right? I'm trying not to get banned off of YouTube. Okay. She isn't put to death. Only the man is put to death. Okay. If you look at verse 25 and you contrast that with verse 27, right? Now, in verse 28, which is the issue that people love to bring up, okay? It's a non-engaged virgin, right? And supposedly the person takes hold of her. Many translations use the word seizes and sleeps with her, and they are discovered. If you notice these words, they are discovered. This language shows mutual consent. Okay, no mention of yelling or forcing. It's what you see as inclusive language. Okay, this thing about they are discovered. This is inclusive language. This is why I believe that this is not RAPE. Okay, this is not that. Okay, this is why he must pay 50 shekels of silver and never divorce her in his selfishness for dishonoring her. In his selfishness for dishonoring her, he must be responsible for her for the rest of his life. Okay, now notice he's the only one that's getting a penalty. Okay, there's no mention of her. Okay, so today's culture knows absolutely nothing of the necessity for value in sexual purity. Okay, purity in marriage, long-standing devotion, responsibility, and faithfulness in relationship, and even less what love actually is. Okay, you don't see that in the culture. Okay, it's not just a feeling, but a commitment towards another human being. Okay, so what is missing? Okay, in these verses, right? The information on the non-engaged virgin. Okay, why do we not see much information on the non-engaged virgin? Okay, why? Because this person, number one, should never even exist. Okay, all right. This is a child. This is a person who's still a child who is supposed to be still under the responsibility of the father. Okay, because this person, number one, should never even exist, and number two, she would never expose herself as not being a virgin. Okay, so there's no exposing this person as not being a virgin. That's taboo in this culture. Let's be honest to the text. Let's be honest to the historicity. Okay, in that culture, there is no non-engaged, non-virgin. Okay, she would be considered either a harlot or a widow, one of the two. Okay, a non-engaged, non-virgin is either a harlot or a widow. Okay, an engaged non-virgin would be a widow to be married due to husband's death. No one would marry a non-virgin who wasn't a widow. Let's just be honest. That's being true to what the culture and the historicity of the text that we're reading. Okay, so there's a clear distinction between verse 27 and verse 28. Verse 27, the woman is engaged. Clearly, the woman had to yell for help. The virgin woman is, verse 28, is not engaged. Okay, so that woman does not yell, right? And they're caught, discovered together. Notice the language is inclusive to both of them. Also, just as the engaged virgin who doesn't yell in verse 23, the results are inclusive to both. It says, bring the two of them for punishment in both cases. Okay, so sexual purity in marriage is held really high. Okay, we see that in verse 13 through 21. A man can't falsely accuse a woman. A woman must be pure in her virginity, and marriage commitment itself must be honored until death. All right? So the question, the law makes it a thing to yell or not to yell. Okay, that's what we're seeing in the law. Okay? It's a thing to yell or not to yell. Okay, as silly as that might seem, as minimalized as one would think about it, but that's what we're reading concerning the law, which basically demonstrates intention or non-intention. Okay, this delineates a distinction between grape and non-grape. Okay, so then why isn't yelling mentioned in verse 28 through 29. There's no mention of any yelling or not yelling in verse 28 through 29. When it's clearly demonstrated in the verse prior to delineate between grape and non-grape, right? Where not yelling means consent, and additionally uses inclusive language between both parties. Okay, scholars have argued over this for a long, long time. The Hebrew word is tapas, something like that. Tapas. And is a grab hold of. It's kind of that's what it connotates. It's grabbing hold of, okay, which doesn't have to mean grape. It doesn't have to mean rape, but is upper translation of the Hebrew word. However, the surrounding context is what determines the meaning of the word, since number one, the scripture already determines the violence of ARPE for a marriage to engage women. It designates descriptors for consent and non-consent. We determine what is really going on in Deuteronomy 22. Okay, so the word tapas, the Hebrew word tapas would be the take advantage of. It's kind of connoting is the person is taking advantage of or to entice, but to overall clash is due to cultural differences between them and us, right? We don't hold sacred any of the institutions that were held back, were held in place back then. And that's the thought of marrying an opportunistic deviant like the man in verses 28 through 29. This clashes with our culture because of that, because we don't hold any of that stuff sacred. So, but what would be the implication? What would be the implications? What would they be for a woman within her culture if those laws weren't in place? Okay, she'd be rejected by her family and her local municipality. She'd be cast away from her synagogue and considered cursed by God. No man would marry her. Afterwards, she'd be an outcast in her society. Okay, so the law is there to protect her. So that person is illicitly seizing her, respects her, the people and the law of God. Okay, if she doesn't really care about, if he doesn't really care about her, he signed a long-standing contract to now do right by her and her family with shame on top of that. Okay, that would hang over him also in a culture that requires purity in marriage and sexuality. Okay, so do you suppose we have more equitable laws now to protect women? Is that what we believe in this culture? In the case that it is talking about REPE, right? Let's say if it is, I don't believe it is, but if it is RAPE in Deuteronomy 22, verse 28 through 29, okay, if they put the man to death, it would be like putting her to death as well. Okay, graping an unbetrothed virgin, right? That person would never marry. The woman would still be ostracized and no one else will be willing to marry her. She'll never have her own family and zero chance of making it within her society. The man must do for her for the rest of his life, and he can never divorce her under God's law. Okay? So what's better? What's better? To kill him or to have him do right by her and make it up to her over the course of his entire freaking life? Okay? With regard to today's standard, let's say booty calls, okay? How many people here would have the ability to fully commit to the first selfish sexual experience? Today, the booty calls, so-called booty calls, have no stigma because they can walk away even if a child is produced from the selfishness. You can just abort and discard like nothing, right? That's our culture. Again, you can't delve deep into historicity of ancient Israel's highly religious moral codes and compare them to today's neo-pagan Western culture. You just can't. If you do that, you'll never gain an honest scholarly approach to the text. There are at least 9 English translations that give the sense that Deuteronomy 22, 28 through 29 is talking about RAPE. But I'm not convinced because of that element that we see of opportunistic language in the verse. Okay, when it says both were discovered, all of them have this language, both were discovered. Notice how the first part of the verse concentrates emphasis on him, but then concludes with inclusive language of them being discovered. Why doesn't it say he was discovered, since it was his act of seizing, or that he was caught? He's the main opportunist. He's the culprit, right? If he were to be the grapist, wouldn't you think that there would be emphasis on how he got caught? He's the culprit. He's the bad guy. So why does it say that they were both discovered, right? So that's why I don't believe that Hebrews 22, 28 through 29 is talking about a RAPE. It's not. Okay, I believe it's consensual in that case. And I think I've made my case for that. If you've enjoyed this, subscribe, like, and share. Okay, thank you for your time. Until next time, God bless.